Hi, it's Pastor Steve. It is January 29, and we are looking at Job chapter 35 through chapter 37. This is the last section of Elihu, and tomorrow God enters the conversation. But as you've been reading Elihu, what have you thought of his argument? In many respects, I find it very similar to the other comforters. He's pointing out that there is a response. We do good, good things happen. We do bad, bad things happen. Elihu, though, as he's speaking, he kind of reveals his own problems. So I like this picture that William Blake drew, and I'm going to put it back on, because this picture is of Elihu sharing his wisdom while the three comforters are kind of listening on, and Job is just trying to ponder everything that is said. But what I find interesting about Elihu is he can't see his own problem. Listen to what he says. In chapter 36, verse 2, he says, I am not finished defending God. Ask you a question. Does God need Elihu's defense? Not really. In fact, God is going to speak for himself starting tomorrow. But here we also see in verse 4 of chapter 36, he says this about himself. I am a man of great knowledge. I don't ever want to say that. You know, when I was in my 20s, I might have been willing to say that. But now that I'm in my 60s, I don't see myself as very smart anymore. It's funny, I've learned a lot, and I've come to learn how little I know. But verse 9, he says this, that God shows them the sin of pride. Elihu, look in the mirror. You're dealing with the sin of pride. Here is a young man in a culture that does not elevate young people as paragons of virtue and knowledge, patting himself on the back. Now, that being said, is it that we can't learn anything from Elihu? Not at all. He says some wonderful and true things. In chapter 37, verse 14, he says, consider the miracles of God. Do you ever do that? My mother used to actually keep a book and write down every time she saw something that she felt was a miracle. I loved it. I loved when she recalled it. I try to do that myself because time and time again, God has done miracles. And that is great wisdom to consider. And then he says this in chapter 37, verse 24. All who are wise show God reverence. That's true. In fact, the book of Proverbs says the fear of the Lord, or the reverence of the Lord, is the beginning of wisdom. Thus, Job is a book of wisdom. When I started reading this passage, though, starting in chapter 35, I read a phrase which immediately took me back to a song that I learned, believe it or not, in the 1970s when I was a teenager. It was written by a musician by the name of Phil Keaggy. And see if you recognize these words. Whenever you find yourself smack dab in the middle of trouble, then you cry out for help because of mean and mighty men. Remember just how you felt, so sad, and your worries had doubled. Then you cried out for help. Then you were free to live again. Now listen to these words. But have you ever said, where is my Maker? The one who gives me songs in the night, who gives me the courage to live right, who even makes me wiser than the birds of the heavens. Call on him. You're precious in his sight. When I read this passage, I realized he was quoting Job. It's funny, I've known that song from the 70s. And when Phil Keaggy wrote it, and the song is called Where is My Maker, I did not realize he was quoting the book of Job. And he's quoting Elihu. Elihu is an imperfect man. I think he thinks higher of himself than he should. But he also stumbles upon wonderful truths. Remember the miracles of God. All who are wise show God reverence. And yes, he can comfort us and give us songs in the night. God bless you, and tomorrow we hear from God himself. Can't wait. Have a great day.